The very important demonstration happening tomorrow, the March for $15 an hour. Comrade Tony and I were on the train, and we were leafleting, getting into train cars, getting on the train and leafleting for the March for $15 an hour. And we actually ran out of leaflets for the March for $15 an hour. But we still had some leaflets for this action tonight, for the Ukraine demonstration. So instead of going into the cars and agitating about how, people need $15 an hour, the minimum wage is too low, we got into the cars and we started agitating about how we don't need a new war against Russia and U.S. hands off Ukraine. And believe it or not, people were just as responsive. People were interested in hearing that. Why is that? Because you go anywhere, you turn on the TV, you turn on the media, there's a barrage of propaganda. We're constantly hearing about how, the evil Russians are storming into poor little Ukraine and the U.S. just wants to protect the innocent. It's propaganda. After the Second World War, there was the Nuremberg trials, very famous. And there was one Nazi war criminal who was executed, and his name was Julius Streicher. And he wasn't executed because he ran gas chambers, and he wasn't executed because he ran the Nazi war machine. He was executed because he was in charge of the propaganda. He was the one who got on the radio waves, and he was the one who put out the information that justified what the Nazis did to the population of Germany. And he was executed because that was a crime. Because with his words and with his lies, he had killed literally millions of people. And right now, the media in this country is playing a similar role in the way they're whipping up a war, a hatred against Russia. It's going to join the European Union. And it wasn't going to accept loans from the IMF. Now, what's the IMF? The International Monetary Fund. Right? This is a trade organization that gives loans to countries, but the loans come with conditions. You take a loan from the IMF, you're required to privatize things and give things up. For example, in Bolivia, when Bolivia took out an IMF loan in the 90s, the result was they had to privatize their water resources. So Bolivians, they made it a crime to even collect water on your rooftop. It was stealing from U.S. water corporations. Ecuador, when they got an IMF loan, they were required to give up their currency and accept the dollar, and that wrecked their economy. So when you take an IMF loan, that's the bankers and the Wall Street. Wall Street controls your economy. It's giving up domestic control of your economy, whether it's a little bit or a lot, and putting Wall Street in command. For whatever reason, this government that existed, that people voted for in Ukraine, didn't want to take that next step, taking the IMF loan and letting the EU in there. And so what happened? There was a reign of terror unleashed in the country. The U.S. poured about $5 billion into funding a movement. There were a lot of people with a lot of different things, but eventually it was an ultra-right-wing movement that's been unleashed in the Ukraine. The leading party is called Svoboda. I think it translates to something like fatherland. These are people who admire Adolf Hitler. These are people who think that Adolf Hitler was doing a great thing and are preaching racist ideology. And this racist movement was funded with our tax dollars, $5 billion of our tax dollars. It was unleashed, and they were paid, and they occupied Kiev, and they took over the square, and eventually, with U.S. support and with CNN portraying them as romantic revolutionaries, and they just care, fighting the good fight, and never pointing out that they were Nazis. They took over the government, and when they took when they took City Hall in Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, when they took City Hall, they unfurled a lot of flags in the capital. And what did they unfurl? They unfurled not just the swastika and the SS lightning bolts, but also the Confederate flag of the United States, of the slaveholders, and the Celtic cross of the Ku Klux Klan, making clear who they are. This is a fascist group installed by the U.S. That the government that the people of Ukraine voted for is no longer in power, and the government that's there is a U.S.-backed government, voted in. They didn't have a quorum. No way this is democratic. They simply seized power. Not voted in. That's what I said. Yes, not in no way voted in. There was no quorum there. It was just simply a seizure of power, and that's what's happened. And now this government, it's in power. And what have we seen? We've seen, of course, austerity. Now, after this government came in, the U.S. gave them an additional $10 billion loan, and now what's one of the first things that's happened is the old age pensions of people in the Ukraine. The average Ukrainian elderly person gets a pension of about $160 a month. That's been cut by 50%. 50%. They're now getting about $80 per month. Right? That's what this glorious revolution that CNN was championing has brought about in the Ukraine. But the thing is, the majority of the people of the Ukraine did not support this coup. And they made that clear overwhelmingly. Every poll that came out made clear they did not support what was done. So because the population wouldn't support handing the government over to the bankers, plundering, Wall Street put in a government that would do what they wanted. And if you think about it, it's not that different from what they did in Detroit, where they've got the emergency manager, Kevin Orr. They overturned the elected government of Detroit, and they've got Kevin Orr appointed by the banks to cut. Right? It's the same thing. It's rule of the banks, conquest by the small group of billionaires in the United States, and they run the world. And when there's countries that dare stand up to them and fight for independence, they become attacked. And of course, there are countries around the world that are standing up to the West and pulling together. And you've got the revolutionary government in Venezuela, you've got Cuba, and there's a global alliance forming, and Russia and China are part of that alliance. So, of course, Ukraine, being just on the border with Russia, the U.S. is very, very interested in that situation. And so the propaganda we're hearing now is that somehow Russia has invaded the region of Crimea. But, of course, the troops that are in Crimea, the Russian troops, have the right to be there under a treaty. There have been 16,000 troops there for the longest time. They're legally allowed to have up to 25,000 troops in the Crimea. But, of course, you don't hear that. What you're hearing on TV is about Russia, evil Russia is invading, and the people of Crimea are very threatened. Because this new government, this government that unfurled the Confederate flag and the swastikas, one of the first things that they did is they outlawed the teaching of the Russian language. So people who are ethnically Russian or speak Russian are no longer allowed to have their language taught in school. And the people in Crimea feel very threatened by this. And overwhelmingly, the people of Crimea are saying they want to break away from this new U.S.-imposed Wall Street government in Ukraine, and they want to break away from it. So on Sunday, they're having a referendum, and they're going to vote whether or not they want their independence. And this referendum, and all the polls show, the people of Crimea are most likely going to vote to have independence from this new Wall Street installed government. So, now John Kerry and others are on TV saying that this vote that's about to take place, where the people of Crimea may vote to break away from the new government, they're saying it's not legitimate. And then they're saying that this vote, the people actually going to the polls and voting, is somehow Russian aggression. It's Russian, by having an election, is committing aggression against this new government. This is a very frightening situation in the Ukraine. But of course, that's not what you would hear if you turn on CNN. You would hear something very, very different. And that's why we were out there and we were protesting. And it was a beautiful demonstration today. But the title of this talk that we had on the leaflet was The Crisis in the Ukraine, Why It Matters to Working Class Youth in the United States. When I was out today, when we were at our demonstration, there were a lot of people who stopped and they seemed interested. You would think that there would be hostility, but there wasn't so much hostility as people were kind of shocked because they'd never heard anyone defending Russia, opposing the government in the Ukraine. People had never heard it. People were interested, and the message that there were some people who said, well, why are you so concerned about what's happening on the other side of the world? Well, the same banks that overthrew the government of Ukraine and have installed this fascist government that is attacking people, they're the same banks. They're the same banks that are setting up the prison industrial complex in this country and making profits from locking people in prison. These are the same banks that are pushing for the privatization of education in this country and causing schools to be closed down, teachers to be laid off. The same banks that are destroying the lives of youth in the United States are the same banks that are funding this government in the Ukraine. And you know what? It's not just in the Ukraine. Wall Street is also funding the Syrian insurgent groups that are going around beheading people. And Wall Street is giving them weapons and funding to go through Syria and attack the country. And you know what? Wall Street is also funding the gangs in Venezuela, the fascist groups that are trying to overthrow the revolutionary government of Venezuela. And you know what? Every corner of the globe where people are fighting for independence, Wall Street is there trying to beat them down. So if we think about things, if we take a Marxist perspective, our message has to be that the working class in the United States, the people who sell their labor to survive, those of us who are workers, not the small 1% ultra-rich, those of us in the working class in this country, we need to align with the working people throughout the world in their struggle for independence from Wall Street and from imperialism. That's our message. It's a global working class, one working class, against the Wall Street monopolists and billionaires. And the Wall Street monopolists, the billionaires, they have all kinds of tricks to keep their power intact, whether it's fascism, whether it's lying media, whether it's wars. The only answer we have, if we want to combat all the horrors and the crimes they commit against us and their profits, is to be in the streets and to mobilize. So whether you were out there today marching for no more lying media, or whether you're going to be there with us tomorrow in Herald Square demanding $15 an hour, raise the minimum wage, that's where you need to be. We need to be in the streets because we can't count on the rich to protect us. They never have. Their interests are opposed to ours. We need a people's movement to stand against Wall Street, their wars, their cutbacks, their prisons, their cops, their low wages. It's time to be in the streets and build a people's movement. Thank you. Or the discussion period. A lot of people talked about what they call a new Cold War or the danger of a new world war. And I think that's something that a lot of people are looking at this with this situation, not just in this room, but around the world, talking about, right? Because there's a bulk, like I said, a bulk of countries that are breaking free from imperialism. Most of them are not socialist countries or capitalist countries, but they kind of come together to form a bloc that opposes the West, and the two biggest countries in that bloc are Russia and China. And the U.S. simply can't tolerate people from around the world starting to do business with Russia and China and not the United States. If they're going to keep their profits flowing, they're going to have to address this. And so the talk of a new world war, a new Cold War, is particularly relevant, I think, and it's something we should be all very aware of. The fact that, the government of Syria is being attacked by the U.S. and it's being supported by Russia and China. The government of Ukraine is, it's all over the world. It's these same actors are lining up. This is the same situation. Now, in the lead up to a new world war, when World War I was breaking out, Lenin made the point that in order to make the case for the war, that they couldn't simply do it with the voices of capitalism doing it. That the capitalists in all the major Western imperialist countries, they had spokespeople in the labor movement and in groups that associated with progressive causes who pushed the war and promoted the war and were able to push the working class to get into the war. There were these huge socialist groups, huge labor union movements, but yet when it was time for a war, certain labor leaders pushed the working class into the war, and the war happened not just because of what the capitalists wanted, but because there were people in the working class movement who could promote it. And that's one thing we also ought to be thinking about, because who's Samantha Power? Now, Samantha Power is the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. She's not a right-winger. She's not a Republican. In fact, she's appeared on Democracy Now! Many times. And on top of that, what else has she done? She wrote a review of Noam Chomsky's book, Hegemony or Survival, in the New York Times, and it was a positive review. Samantha Power, who's at the UN every day pushing for more wars, pushing for more attacks on Syria, she began her career not just not being some right-winger. She had rallies and demonstrations against child soldiers. Just so happened these rallies and demonstrations she was leading, they always were promoting the U.S. sending more troops to Uganda, but it was an attempt to look left-wing and to look progressive. And, she jokingly refers to herself as the genocide chick. Like, that's funny somehow. But she's built a whole career kind of having a left cover, right? And when you look at it, we had the demonstration today from CNN to Fox marching against this threat of war. But where's the anti-war movement? We're not the entire anti-war movement. We've played a huge role in it. But there are all kinds of anti-war and peace organizations. But where are they? They're nervous. They're scared, right? When Bush threatened to invade Iraq, there were all kinds of people in the streets. But only the International Action Center had the courage to call a demonstration about Ukraine. Why is that? That's because there are sections of the people's movement and the working class movement who don't share our perspective, our anti-imperialist perspective, and that's something to think about. Now, this fascist movement in the Ukraine, like Sarah pointed out, it only represents 5% of the population, if even that. But that's what fascism has always been. Fascism always represents a minority, and that's why as soon as they took over control of Kiev, one of the first things they were doing was they were going and they were carrying out all these extremely public acts of violence, tearing down monuments to people who fought against Hitler, going to progressive places and having book burnings. Fascism is about terror and violence, and about doing so very publicly and scaring people from being out into the street, terrorizing people. Hillary Clinton recently compared Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, to Adolf Hitler. And she said, their presence in Crimea, that's just like what Hitler was doing. And that's really, really offensive to the people of Russia and the surrounding countries that made up the Soviet Union, because more people died fighting Hitler in those countries than any other country on earth. 27 million people, probably more than that, perished fighting Hitler. And we need to be clear about this. Now, the U.S. and the Soviet Union were aligned during the Second World War. But until the Second World War broke out, and even during the war, there's a whole history of, especially Wall Street and big business, having financial and friendly relationships with the Nazis. The IBM Corporation is one example. They designed, the punch card machine, one of the early computers. One of their first contracts was with the people running the concentration camps. That was one of their first contracts. And they designed the punch cards that were used for the Holocaust. And even after the war broke out, they were sending people over to Germany to make sure the machines were working. Right? The radio waves in this country. They had Father Coughlin, the radio priest, and he would give sermons every Sunday saying that Hitler was a great man and that the real enemy is the communists. And I can't talk about this. I have to end. I have to, because we get so bogged down. We talk about the right wing and we talk about, and it can be really disheartening. So I have to talk about something that might seem at first like it's a little bit off topic, but when I was in high school, I was pretty bored a lot, and I spent a lot of time, just on the computer looking at information and reading. One day, and I grew up in a little town called Orrville, Ohio, a very small town, and I remember I just had the idea, and I got on the computer, I said, I wonder if there's ever been another communist in Orrville, Ohio. So I typed into the computer, Orrville and communist, just to see what would come up. And it was through doing that I found out about a man named Carl Geiser. Carl Geiser was born in the same town I'm from, in Orrville, Ohio, and he was born in a farming family, first-generation immigrants, and he graduated from high school, got very good marks, and he went to study at Cleveland State University on a full scholarship. This was in the mid-30s. And while he was there, he was recruited into a club they had on the campus at Cleveland State University called Students Against War and Fascism. And he was recruited into this club called Students Against War and Fascism, and pretty soon he was the president of Students Against War and Fascism on a national level. And then in Spain, the democratic government that the people of Spain voted for faced an insurgency from a fascist general named Francisco Franco. So Carl Geiser, this guy from a farm in Orrville, Ohio, dropped out of college, and he went to Spain with something called the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, which was organized by the U.S. Communist Party. And they went to Spain and they fought against the fascists alongside the Spanish people. And he was a captain in the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, and he was eventually taken prisoner. He was eventually taken prisoner and was held in a fascist prison for many years. And when I thought about that story, when the title of my talk tonight was "Why Does It Matter to Working Class Youth?" This global working class perspective, this understanding that we're all part of the working class. And I remember the first time I came to New York City in my entire life, the first time I ever visited this city, I was walking. I came it was when my senior year of high school, and I came for an anti-war demonstration, April 29, 2006, I believe. And I was here, and it was an anti-war demonstration. And I remember I was just blown away. I'd never seen New York City. I'd never seen anything like it. All the big buildings, all the signs, everything. But and I saw so many communist groups, and it was just so exciting. But I remember one thing that I saw as I got toward the end of the march. There was a group of old men in wheelchairs, 4 or 5 or 6 of them, and they had a banner, and it said "Veterans of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade Against the War in Iraq." So, think about that. That's the struggle that's been going on, right? For generations, people have been fighting against the bosses and the bankers and the super rich, and we're going to keep doing that. And an attack on the people of Kiev is an attack on the workers in this country. It's an attack on all oppressed people. And we're going to organize, and we're going to try to beat back this fascist coup. Victory to working people, and down with the capitalist system. Thank you.